Good afternoon in India, good morning in Portugal. A very warm welcome to this virtual Blue Talk entitled Conservation and Development Imperatives for Blue Economy. This initiative is promoted by the Portuguese Embassy in New Delhi with the full support and prompt collaboration of the ORF, Center for New Economic Diplomacy, and also the United Nations in India. This undoubted relevant Blue Talk that we are having today is linked to the United Nations Oceans Conference taking place in Lisbon, Portugal, from the 27th of June until the 1st of July. And this conference is co-organized by the governments of Portugal and Kenya. Our goal today with today's Blue Talk is to mobilize and bring together not only the diplomatic network, politicians, experts, different stakeholders, a diversity of companies, NGOs, scientific communities to participate at this so relevant conference in Lisbon, but also affirm Portugal's international relevance regarding oceans expertise. We are really looking forward to today's session, which will be moderated by Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh. Dr. Ghosh is the director at the Center for New Economic Diplomacy and the ORF at Calcutta Center. So for this daily Blue Talk, the two themes chosen are part of the 8 interactive dialogues taking place at the UN Oceans Conference in Lisbon. So these two themes are managing, protecting, conserving, and restoring marine and coastal ecosystems, and leveraging interlinkages between Sustainable Development Goal 14 and other goals towards the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. But for such important debate at this Blue Talk, we have the distinguished presence of Portuguese, Indian, and UN experts who will discuss today, amongst others, the blue economy challenges and relevance, the protection of marine and coastal environments, the lives and livelihood of coastal communities dependent on goods and services provided by such ecosystems, and the synergy between SDG 14 and other SDGs in achieving the so important 2030 Agenda. Very importantly, before addressing these challenging issues with such expertise level that we have here today, we will have the opening addresses from the ambassadors of Portugal, Kenya, and the UN resident coordinator in India. Now, I give the floor to His Excellency, the Ambassador of Portugal in India, Mr. Carlos Pereira Marques. His Excellency, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Dear colleagues from Kenya and the United Nations, distinguished speakers and participants, I warmly welcome you to this webinar titled Conservation and Development Imperatives for the Blue Economy, an event that we are jointly organizing, keeping in view the upcoming second United Nations Ocean Conference, UNOC, that, as you know, will take place in Lisbon from the 27th of June to the 1st of July. Today's meeting is part of a series of Blue Talks that are taking place all over the world, organized by us, with the purpose of promoting and reinforcing the visibility of this important conference. Co-hosted by Portugal and Kenya, and with its high-level segment on the 27th of June, the Ocean Conference will involve all relevant stakeholders for the implementation of the crucial SDG 14. That reads, to conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. As it is well known, Portugal is a country with a generous maritime area, with the oceans dominating the Portuguese history since immemorial times. For this reason, the sustainable development of the oceans has been a fundamental strategic priority for my country. And we have a long and strong track record of working on marine matters. We count on the precious support of India, also an important maritime nation, in these very essential endeavors. Finally, we cannot forget it. It was the ocean that brought us together, Portugal and India. UNOC will certainly be one of the most relevant events about oceans at the present time, and an opportunity to bring all geographies together. An action-oriented declaration focused on science and innovation as key areas for the implementation of SDG 14 is expected to be adopted in Lisbon. As the UN Secretary General António Guterres recently put it, reiterating a prevailing sense of urgency, we ask all the delegations to bring a plan, not just a speech, to Lisbon. Portugal always defended the creation of a global agenda for the oceans. And we do believe that the Lisbon Conference will play a leading role in that direction, namely by highlighting the close nexus existing between oceans, climate change, and economic development and growth. The conference's interactive dialogues will assume in this context a major importance, as they will provide opportunity to assess the most relevant and pressing issues related to the urgent implementation of SDG 14, such as marine pollution, blue economy, protecting and restoring marine and coastal ecosystems, ocean acidification, fisheries, the law of the sea, and marine technology transfer, among many, many others. Bearing in mind those concerns and how crucial it is to share experiences and innovative approaches, the Blue Talk of today, involving Indian, Portuguese, and UN experts, will focus, as Claude already said, in two thematic areas. First one, managing, protecting, serving, and restoring marine and coastal ecosystems. And the second one, leveraging interlinkages between SDG 14 and other goals towards the implementation of the 2030 agenda. These two areas are very dear both to India and Portugal. In our case, we've been internationally leading the debate on the crucial significance of marine protected areas to foster biodiversity protection. And we demand a cross-sectorial approach to them. On the second, on the other subject, my country advocates an urgent and better understanding of all SDGs in its various ocean-related dimensions: protection, conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of marine diversity. Informed citizens should support effective implementation of decisions concerning the seas, based on the best available knowledge. The involvement of the scientific community, academic institutions, the private sector, NGOs, philanthropic youth and child associations, the entire civil society and social partners will determine the future of the oceans. These are the principles we are putting here today in practice. Before giving the floor to the other distinguished speakers, I'd like to express my deep gratitude to the Center for New Economic Diplomacy of the Observer Research Foundation, a very faithful partner of this embassy, as well as to the United Nations representation in India, for their prompt support and collaboration in the organization of this initiative. My thanks also go to the entire virtual audience that is participating in this Blue Talk, and which, I'm certain, will share with us the fundamental aim of ensuring a sustainable use of ocean resources. I am sure that our discussion today will be the prelude of a committed and visionary participation of India in the upcoming Ocean Conference. Together, we'll do it better. Thank you so much, and I give now the floor to my dear colleague, the Ambassador of Kenya. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, my colleague, Ambassador Carlos Pereira Marquez, Ambassador of Portugal to India. Sean Bishop, the UN Resident Coordinator to India, and all the discussants who are going to handle the most valuable topic of today. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed an honor for me to join you all in this series of Blue Talks, which are an important milestone in our journey to the UN Ocean Conference 2022, to be held soon in Lisbon, Portugal. I wish to join my colleague, the Ambassador of Portugal to India, to also welcome you to these Blue Talks on the topic conservation and development imperatives for the blue economy. Oceans are major contributors to livelihoods of mankind. This livelihood is not only on the provision of food, but in many other ways, like global regulation, nutrient regulation, and carbon storage, among other many benefits mankind derive from oceans. Though the benefits enjoyed by human populations across the world from the oceans and coastal ecosystems are huge, the same environment is faced with serious threats. These threats include depletion, degradation of these ecosystems, acidification, pollution, depletion of fish stocks, and other threats. The challenges facing the oceans and the coastal ecosystem pose serious challenges to human survival, especially to the more vulnerable populations who live along the coastal environments. Ladies and gentlemen, the Lisbon UN Conference will definitely raise global awareness on the challenges facing the international community in maintaining healthy oceans. We believe solutions and agreements will be reached which will reduce the negative impact of human development that brings to the oceans and coastal ecosystems. Kenya's aspiration for the UN 2022 Ocean Conference is to go beyond the restatement of political commitments and to deliver the necessary action that would save these environments from further destruction. This conference will accord the stakeholders an opportunity to bring about a dimension of effective partnership that will support the implementation of Sustainable Development Goal, the SDG 14. As co-hosts with Portugal of this conference, Kenya is very proud of the achievements we have made as a country in championing global conversation around sustainable utilization of living and non-living marine resources. So lastly, ladies and gentlemen, I take this opportunity to wish all of you a fruitful discussion as we prepare towards the conference later in the month of June. May I thank you and may God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, His Excellency, for your relevant contribution. And now I invite Mr. Shombi Sharp, the United Nations Coordinator in India, to address our audience. Please, Mr. Sharp, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Namaskar, Ambassador Marques, Ambassador Betts, Dr. Ghosh, Ms. Matias. It's great honor, a pleasure to be here today, to be joining all of you for the Blue Talks with representatives we have here, obviously, from the global south, north, east, west, whatever terminology we want to use. We see that this is a global undertaking and a global priority, and appreciate very much the opportunity. I thank the Center for New Economic Diplomacy, the Embassy of Portugal here in India, and ORF for convening this important conversation jointly together. Appreciate very much the governments of Kenya and Portugal for co-hosting the upcoming UN Oceans Conference in Lisbon, as has been mentioned. We're all very, very excited for that. And the conference and of course the theme of today's discussion really could not come at a more critical time for the world's oceans. Of course, we know that the oceans hold the key to addressing some of the greatest global challenges that we're facing today, from climate change, of course, to biodiversity challenges, pressures, pollution, and equitable economic prosperity. I think we know that over 3 billion people are dependent on the oceans for their livelihoods. that oceans are on the front lines of the climate crisis, absorbing something like 1/3 of all of our carbon dioxide production by humans. And oceans are, of course, the lifeblood, the arteries through which our trade flows, which has been sort of brought into even sharper focus in recent times during the crises of the pandemic, of conflict and war. And we understand that here in our part of the world, the Indian Ocean is one of the most important trade conduits in the world as well. And yet we recognize that the world's oceans are under tremendous pressure, again, from the triple planetary crisis. They are under assault from pollution, from plastic waste, warming, overfishing, and many other pressures. So as much as trade and the oceans remind us about this interconnectivity, we also see, for example, with pollution, that a plastic bottle that's thrown into the ocean in Mumbai can wash up on the beach in Mombasa, or microplastics seeping into the ocean in Bangladesh can end up, on the waters, the beaches of Lisbon, and vice versa. So really, this is all about our human interconnectivity. And as the recent IPCC report tells us, rising levels are threatening to flood, for example, here in India, many coastal communities. The threat is increasing. Up to 170 million people are vulnerable to rising sea levels, from Mumbai to Chennai to many others. And as the UN Secretary General has said, it's as if humanity has been waging war against nature. And it is time for us to make peace. And the oceans should be the first place for us to call a truce. And so I think this is really the spirit of the discussion today. There is scope for some measured optimism. At the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow, we saw the world come together and take steps to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Every fraction that we can get closer to that counts. That's why this is so important today, this discussion, to maintain this sense of urgency, adopting innovative science, tech, nature-based solutions for sustainable management of the oceans, and effective coordination models are very key. And I know that today we're talking about looking at polycentric approaches to coordination, that they have really the potential to deliver many complementary advantages. And I think it really resonates with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the concept at the core of intersectorality, of flexibility, of distributed ownership as well. And finally, just to say that here in India, I see also a lot of hope for inspiration, especially in the young people in the front lines of the climate battle, offering us solutions and models. For example, I've had the opportunity to join Afroz Shah in Mumbai, Versava Beach, for the world's largest beach cleanup initiative that has sort of taken off and gone global. Or Soumya Biswal, a young person on the east coast of India who is working passionately with his communities for nature-based solutions to help protect villages and mangrove forests in the face of rising waters and cyclone threats. And then finally, of course, the government here, the Prime Minister Modi and the government of India has announced the Panchamrit targets, showing India's leadership in this direction. And I think really the philosophy of the new LIFE initiative the government has launched, it's about every single person, every citizen making a change, even a small change, but making a change in their lifestyles, all adding up. So, finally, SDG 14, we've mentioned, it cuts across all of the other SDGs. It receives too little funding. I think 1% of climate financing is sort of directly earmarked, allocated towards the ocean. So we really need to step up as a global community in that as well. The benefits are tremendous. The blue economy has great promise, not just for SDG 14, but for the whole of humanity, the whole Agenda 2030. Thank you very much. And so encouraged to hear the ambassadors talking about how governments are being asked to come, not just with speeches, but with actual plans. I think that's absolutely what we need. Thank you so much. Dhanyavad.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp, for your valuable contribution. And with such honorable opening addresses, we reach the end of the opening session. And I would like to invite Dr. Nilajan Ghosh to proceed with the Blue Talk discussion panel. Dr. Ghosh, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia Matthias. Thank you, Excellencies. Thank you, Mr. Sharp. A very good afternoon to all of you. It is a pleasure to welcome all to the panel discussion. There is no doubt that the opportunities offered by the Blue are manifold, and so are the challenges. And probably this time frame of 80-90 minutes is not enough to look at them, or rather, in fact, get into even touch the tip of the iceberg. But the threats are emerging. Threats are emerging from global warming and climate change, as also from other forms of anthropogenic interventions on the working of the natural ecosystem of the blue economy. Now, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, 1994, highlighted a plethora of challenges for the oceans and the marine resources from various sources. Though the UNCLOS, or the UNCLOS, on one hand, suggested some of the ways to respond to some of the critical problems that arise with the marine ecosystems through its depletion and degradation, one needs to be cognizant of the fact that newer challenges are emerging in various parts of the world. And examples are too many. They include ocean acidification, marine pollution, depletion of the fish stocks, degradation of the marine ecosystems, and even more complex issues are emerging, which are related to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or IUU fishing, then habitat destruction, chemical pollution, oil spills, marine plastic pollution, deoxygenation through excessive nutrient supply. On the other hand, we have the coastal degradation, sea level rise resulting in saline water intrusion. So there are various verticals on which the challenges are emerging. The issues from this perspective are not merely environmental. The issues are not of environmental governance, but of a holistic development governance in the context of the blue economy. And there are too many. And today we have two panels with 6 speakers addressing two apparently differentiated but intrinsically interdependent topics. A, managing, protecting, conserving, restoring marine and coastal ecosystems. And topic B is leveraging the interlinkages between SDG 14 and other goals towards implementation of the 2030 agenda. I just request each speaker to confine their initial interventions to around 7 to 8 minutes. I will indicate when 2 minutes will be left to each of them. We propose to have a Q&A that can form the second round of short interventions. I'd request also the audience to type their questions in the comments box, even while the discussions are going on. We may not be in a position to take up all the questions and may need to be a bit selective in interest of time. So without much ado, I'd like to move to the first speaker of theme 1, Dr. Ana Kulako, who is going to speak on managing, protecting, conserving, and restoring marine and coastal ecosystems. Dr. Kulako, the floor is yours. Dr. Kulako, can you unmute yourself?
Sorry, yes, I'm very sorry. Well, I would like to thank you for the invitation, and I will start my talk about the deep sea, one of the strangest and least known, but the most important biome on Earth. Because if we look to our planet, 70% is ocean, and from that ocean, 90% is deep sea. So all the volume below 200 meters until the seafloor, including the seafloor, it's deep sea. And the deep sea it's dark, it's cold, there is a huge pressure on the organisms, and it's poor in terms of biomass. However, it plays a key role in regulating the Earth's climate. More than 90% of the heat, of the excess heat produced by humans, it's absorbed in the deep ocean. And more or less 25% of the excess of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it's also stored in the deep ocean. And generally people, they don't care about the bottom of the ocean. This is a cartoon from the New Yorker. and it reflects society. They don't care because they don't see. But I'm going to show you the deep sea and explain you the importance and why we should protect them and why we are protecting. If you look to the seascape, it's similar to a landscape with valleys, mountains, plains, trenches, and all of these areas will have their own fauna, their own organisms. We have these amazing organisms, very fragile, jellyfishes, the translucent squids, and the lanternfishes. We also have amazing creatures in the bottom of the ocean, coral reefs and coral gardens that by no means are less beautiful or less important than the shallow water coral reefs, deep sea sponge aggregations, black corals that can live thousands of years. And all of them, there are restaurants, houses, cities, and nurseries for, among other functions, to other organisms. And then we have all the organisms that live in the soft sediment and also nearby the manganese nodules that are in soft sediment. These are important biodiversity, and the deep sea is one of the largest biodiversity on Earth. But also, they are very important supporting services. They are really, really important on the nutrient cycle, on creating habitat, on improving the resilience of the ecosystem. They have primary and secondary production. They have a huge amount of biodiversity, and they are really important on the water circulation and exchange. And why? The supporting service will give us provisioning services. They will give you materials like fish, oil, gas, energy, minerals, chemical and pharmaceutical compounds, new molecules. They are really important regulation services. It helps the planet to function on the climate regulation, on the detoxification and water absorption. They are really important on the carbon absorption and sequestration, and on the biological regulation and biological remediation, among cultural services too, like recreation, tourism, education, and aesthetic. Moreover, due to the characteristics of the deep sea, cold, dark, low amount of food, and with a high pressure, the organisms, they have important and different metabolisms. They slow grow, they have high longevity, and they reproduce very, very late. If you look to this scheme, you can see compared to man, we have here the black corals on the deep sea that grow 0.05 millimeters per year. So this black coral here that you see on the right side shall have 2,000 years. This deep sea fish, which was fished and almost driven to extinction, the orange roughy, it grows 7.6 centimeters per year compared to a sardine that grows 20 centimeters per year. And it reproduces the first time with 30 years. So it means that when we caught a fish with 25 years, he has never had the chance to reproduce themselves and to create new organisms. So the characteristics of the deep sea species are high longevity, slow growth, late reproduction, which make them very vulnerable species. And the Azores, we are 9 islands, volcanic islands in the middle of the Atlantic, halfway between Europe and North America, and deep sea, it's on our backyard. And we have several deep sea habitats like the cold water gardens and reefs, sponge aggregations, deep sea hydrothermal vents and abyssal plains. Moreover, all this charismatic fauna that also the Azores are known, like devil rays, blue sharks, turtles, marine mammals, due to advanced satellite and biologging animal telemetry research, we have been observing that actually they are also using the deep sea. They go to more than 1,000 meters, and we think they are going there and stay there for a few hours to eat, to desparasitize, or to cool down. Also, we have been studying a deep sea of ecosystems, and we are mapping them and try to use science and technology to better understand of them. And because of that, we are able to use some of these deep sea organisms on an experimental hub to understand the impacts of climate change and other anthropogenic impacts on these organisms. You can see here some sclerotinan corals, some gorgonies, and some mussels from the deep sea hydrothermal vents. Also, Using this knowledge, we were pioneering in the Azores on protecting the deep sea, creating marine protected areas in the deep sea based on the scientific knowledge and based on the scientific discoveries and mapping, like the deep sea hydrothermal vents and some seamounts, which have large VME ecosystems or large aggregations of VME indicator species. But I'm going to show you this amazing deep sea that we have in the Azores. Here you can see several crustaceans and the fishes that are eating those crustaceans. And here we are around 500 meters deep. So it's not a desert, it's full of other organisms that here they are attracted by the light, but generally they are on this huge volume that is the deep sea. Here we have a pyrosome. A pyrosome is a jelly creature with all of these tentacles. They are capturing all of these creatures that are around here. And when they die, they are going to feed the creatures that live in the bottom of the ocean. Here we have several lanternfishes. You can see that sometimes it looks like a bright light or some falling stars. Actually, these are dragonfishes and lanternfishes that they produce their own light on bioluminescent organs, like you can see here in the dorsals of this fish. They are producing their own light by chemical reactions or using bacteria to create the light. And this light, it serves to communicate on this dark environment or to escape from predators saying, I'm bigger than I am. Here we have a ctenophore. It's with this cilia. It looks very fragile, but with these filaments, they are one of the largest predators because when dispersed by a swarm of crustaceans, it will trap them and it will digest them through several weeks and months. Here we have a red squid. The red, it's a color that it's not seen on the deep sea. So when the organisms are red, it's like they are invisible if they have a mantle of invisibility. And now we are arriving to the bottom, where we can start seeing other creatures that are living on the sediment and some fishes that are being trapped due to the currents. And in the bottom, you can see these amazing corals of different colors. This is a black coral with almost 1,000 years, and it's the house of several creatures like the
Dr. Kulako, can you just sum up in 2 minutes?
And we also have these spider crabs that are living in these nice environments. Here, the pyrosome that you saw in the water column fell down and it's eaten by a spider crab. Here you see these blue sponges that are also the house and the restaurant of several organisms and also nursery. These looks like these are large sponges that are made of silk. So these organisms are also very important on the chemical equilibrium of the ocean. Here we have the bird nest sponge aggregation, also that is creating habitat. These large fields are also the house, the nursery, and the restaurants of many other species. And this can be for tens and hundreds of years. And one of the most unknown is the sediment, that there are lots of creatures that are living inside the sediment. And these sea urchins, they are eating the organic material. And the most fantastic habitat is the deep sea hydrothermal vents that expel fluids with more than 300 degrees Celsius. And all of these organisms are really unique. They just live close to these deep sea hydrothermal vents and have adaptations to this hot, acidic, and full of heavy metal fluids. And this food here, it's more than 350 degrees. And you can see that around this food, we have all of these shrimps that are living here and can cope with this very extreme and harsh environment. So new molecules can be observed from this area. And the deep sea is this, with all these small organisms and all of these important large organisms that are contributing to the surface. So I hope that you see that the deep sea, it's amazing, like the coastal waters, and we really need to protect and to preserve in order to have a better planet and a future planet to the future generations. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kulako. That was a fascinating exposition, a deep dive into the deep blue. And there are organic ways in which the ecosystem functions, and in the process, they keep on providing us with all sorts of supporting services, which in the process is essentially supporting all our provisioning, regulating, and the cultural services as well. So with that, from a very natural science perspective, I'd like to move to Dr. Divya Dutt, who is an economist by training, and she's working with the UN Deputy Head at the United Nations Environment Program. So over to you, Dr. Dutt, to provide a perspective from the UN as also from an economist, an environmental economist.
Thank you very much, Nilanjan, and Excellencies, Mr. Sharp, and other experts on the panel. It's really a pleasure for me to be joining this eminent panel on this very important issue. I think globally, the importance of oceans for sustainable development has been recognized for quite some time now, including, I would say, sort of starting way back at Agenda 21, and then it was reiterated at the Johannesburg Plan of Implementation. It was reaffirmed in the outcome document of the Rio +20 conference, where a very strong position, especially by small island developing states, were articulated for a blue economy approach to be more prominently addressed. And this is now, of course, reflected through SDG 14, Life Below Water. I think as we just sort of saw and heard, the importance of the oceans cannot be overstated. I don't think we understand it well enough, but from whatever little we know, we already know that the importance cannot be overstated. Oceans form the largest ecosystem on Earth and provide a range of provisioning services, as well as a range of less discussed ecosystem services. And Nilanjan, you spoke about it, Mr. Sharp spoke about it, so I won't go into that. Oceans are also one of the main repositories of the world's biodiversity, because they constitute over 90% of the habitable space on the planet. And, just the recorded number of marine species is over 250,000, and we don't even know how many we don't know yet. And when we look at, human development historically, we know given the importance of the resources of coastal and marine ecosystems, it is not surprising that human settlements have developed near the coast. Approximately 38% of the world's population today lives within 100 kilometers of the coast, and 50% lives within 200 kilometers. So this itself is sort of saying something about the importance of oceans, about, the importance of oceans and coastal ecosystems for people, for their livelihoods, and for the economy at large. Specifically, in economic terms, roughly 60% of the world's GDP comes from the ocean and the coastal areas within 100 kilometers of the coastline. Oceans provide a substantial portion of the global population with food and livelihoods, and are the major sort of the means of transport for over 80% of global trade. So, lots of statistics on the importance of oceans for the economy and for the well-being, economic well-being also of people, whether it comes to tourism or whether it's a supply of hydrocarbons. 32% of hydrocarbons, for instance, are already sourced from the seabed. Exploration is expanding, technologies are advancing, and they're opening new frontiers of marine resource development, from bioprospecting to mining of seabed mineral resources. And of course, the whole sort of gamut of renewable blue energy production, from wind, wave, tidal, thermal, and biomass resources, which can be sourced back to oceans. If you look at India in particular, and this is affirmed in India's draft Blue Economy policy, India has a coastline of about 7,500 kilometers, 9 coastal states, over 1,300 islands, and about 2 million square kilometers of very rich coastal and marine resources. Developing the blue economy is vital for India's economic growth, it is also vital for sustaining the livelihoods and income of over 4 million fishermen and coastal communities that are dependent on ocean and marine ecosystems. So clearly the potential of the oceans to meet sustainable development goals and sustainable development needs is enormous, but this will be possible only if oceans and coastal ecosystems can be maintained or even restored to a healthy and productive state. And again, Nilanjan has highlighted some of the issues that we are facing already on overexploitation of fish stock, on pollution of our coastal ecosystems, whether it's through plastic or other chemicals, rising CO2 levels, which are undermining fundamental aspects of many marine ecosystems through ocean acidification, as an example. There are some studies that UNEP has done in the Asia Pacific region, which bring out very starkly not only the high dependence in this region on oceans, but also the sort of kinds of impacts that the region is already seeing. The region is the world's largest producer of fish. However, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is the leading cause in the overexploitation of fisheries in the region. It's sort of, the estimates suggest that 1 in 5 of landed fish catch is actually illegal, unreported, or unregulated. So that's the extent of that issue. And there is, of course, the whole issue of plastic pollution. We know, for instance, that 75% of all plastic ever produced has become waste. And a lot of this, to the tune of 150 million tons, it is estimated, is in our oceans today. Studies are suggesting that if we don't take action soon, the amount of plastic debris in the ocean could actually triple by 2050. There are several indicators of marine ecosystem degradation, coastal erosion, damage to coral reefs, and we saw the importance of coral reefs in the fascinating video that was just sort of preceding my address. And of course, climate change impacts, which are not just not just sort of directly affecting people, but also through the changes on the ocean, such as resulting from sea level rise, natural disasters, are really exacerbating the existing vulnerabilities of communities that depend on coastal fisheries, and they're also contributing to the loss of coastal resources and coastal infrastructure. So clearly, when we look at all of these studies and what research is showing us, managing and protecting marine and coastal ecosystems is a top priority. And as was said earlier, it is, this is the right time for us to act, given that we are so close to 2030, and many of the SDG 14 targets are still not met, and we're not close enough. A cohesive and integrated approach is essential to address these challenges, I'd say both within a country and among countries. And the blue economy approach is a response in some sense to this challenge, and essentially conceptualizes oceans as a development space where spatial planning integrates conservation, including sustainable use of resources, of oil, of mineral wealth extraction, bioprospecting, sustainable energy production, and marine transport. This is in sharp contrast to an approach where oceans have been perceived as a means of free resource extraction and waste dumping, with costs externalized from economic calculations. The blue economy will incorporate, hopefully, ocean values and services into economic modeling, into economic accounting, into how we measure income, how we report income, and also in decision-making processes. And we'll seek to ensure greater attention to aspects related to, various aspects of sustainability, including carbon budgets, including tourism, including pollution, etc. Will sort of get captured. The impacts of all these environmental issues on oceans will get captured in economic decision-making.
Divya, just need to sum up now.
Yes, I'm summing up. And of course, all these aspects are underpinned by, the importance of structured and international cooperation on the blue economy. And I'm really glad that this discussion is taking place. I just want to end with, one, I would say, a very landmark development that has happened recently. I'll not go into the details of what UNEP is doing in this area, but I just want to highlight that at the recently concluded United Nations Environment Assembly, member states got together to agree to a new resolution to end plastic pollution towards a new legally binding instrument. The resolution establishes an intergovernmental negotiating committee that will develop the specific content of the new plastic pollution treaty with the aim of completing its work by the end of 2024. An ad hoc open-ended working group is meeting even as we speak to prepare the work of the intergovernmental negotiating committee as requested by the UNIA 2 resolution. So I will end there. There are lots of things that the UNEP India office is working on in plastics, on the science of plastic pollution, on advocacy, as well as engaging youth and children on taking active action on the ground. But I'll leave that out for question and answer and discussion, but happy to provide further inputs on any of these aspects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Divya. In fact, thank you so much for bringing up the numbers, the importance of ecosystem services. Valuing ecosystem services has also, in fact, it's a central role in the process of monitoring, protecting, and managing the coastal and the marine ecosystems. Now, we heard two perspectives. One, the very natural science perspective, deep ecology in one sense. The other component was the ecological economic issues and how essentially UN and UNEP is looking at the whole problem. Now, in fact, I would request Dr. Danda, who happens to be a social anthropologist, but deeply into natural sciences and conservation and working in the coastal regions, especially in this part of the world on the Sundarbans, to come up with his deliberations, his presentations. Anurag, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Excellencies, panel members, good morning, good afternoon, as appropriate. When I received this invitation, for which I'm grateful, I also received, I'm sure all of us did, a set of questions. I will try and respond to a few of those. There were 7, I will try and respond to 3 of them. Taking a very different perspective, which is more from my experience as a practitioner working in the region, as Dr. Ghosh mentioned, I will make use of a short presentation to make my arguments. Don't worry, it has only images, so nothing to worry about. Is it visible, Dr. Ghosh? Okay, thank you. So the questions that I will respond to is, what are the threats that currently affect the marine and coastal ecosystem? We all know of the ones that have already been referred to. There are various others which seemingly are unseen. Abandoned infrastructure, for example. When I say abandoned infrastructure, the immediate thing that comes to our mind is large-scale infrastructure. But there are millions of infrastructure, both public and private, that dot the coastline. This used to be a public building belonging to the Forest Department, which has been abandoned for obvious reasons. There are also private infrastructure that gets abandoned due to the changes that are occurring, exacerbated or accelerated by impacts of global warming and sea level rise. Besides these, there are others that happen. In fact, one of the unique dolphin populations have been lost. This is the Baiji of the Yangtze Delta that has been lost fairly recent. 2007, 6-7 was the period when it was declared extinct because of the rapid changes in and around that region. We need to take lessons all over the world, including India. India is gearing up towards the Sagarmala project. It has its own arguments. There are obviously trade-offs, but we need to be mindful of the threats that it poses. There are costs to be borne, and therefore extinction is something that we need to be mindful of. One of the major arguments for the Sagarmala project is improvement in logistics, improvement in terms of resources, improvement in terms of avoiding bottlenecks and making it faster, and so on and so forth. All arguments well taken, but there are signals to be taken from there. So coastal development is something that will happen, is inevitable, but at the same time, we need to take precaution. Something else that we very seldom notice is sand mining. We essentially associate sand mining with river, which is naturally the case. But here I want to draw your attention to the fact that sand is also exported and imported. Just to give you a glimpse of the import-export happening within our region. India being the larger country, needing the resources and importing it over long distances, as far as Cambodia, Malaysia, and so forth, which also poses a danger, not only threats, not only to the environment from where it is being exported, but also to the areas where it is being imported. The other threat that we are more familiar with, this is inland pollution, which eventually finds its way into the sea. And of course, there is in situ pollution. This is oil spill within the World Heritage Site of the Sundarbans, where I've worked pretty much all my life. So these are some of the threats that are not attention grabbing. They're under the radar, but they are, in terms of numbers of events or number of installations, are mind-boggling and therefore needs to be within our attention. There was another question about expansion of marine protected areas. I just would like to touch upon this. The idea of marine protected area is, of course, conceptually very similar to the terrestrial protected area concept, but in terms of governance, in terms of the interconnectedness, it is actually quite different, and therefore the challenges are quite different. In fact, expansion of marine protected area may not necessarily be the solution unless the cause and effect are localized. Otherwise, the MPAs are not going to make a difference. And even if the problem, the cause and effect relationship is localized, we need to draw a lesson from the terrestrial protected areas. We've had a phenomenal increase, not only in India, but globally in terrestrial protected areas. Yet, the global rate of species extinction has actually hastened over the last 50 years or so. It is at least, according to IPBES, it is at least 10 to hundreds of times higher than it has been over the planet in 10 billion years. Right? So this is one of the questions. So I wanted to address. The other part of this, does the need for conservation come in conflict with need for harness the potential of marine resources? To it is not necessarily the case. I just want to skip this. Another lived experience. This is what we are currently working on. This is the marine ecosystem, but within the marine ecosystem, it is possible to harness the resources in a way that it is not damaging. Countries like India, where the population is likely to be about 1.6 billion by the middle of this century, will necessitate greater amounts of food production. There is no doubt about it. Yet we will have to find ways of doing it in a manner that it is as benign as possible to the natural areas, because we cannot be converting any further natural areas into production systems. We already use.
Can you just sum up now?
Yeah, sure. We already use about 50% of the land area for our cropping purposes. So these are the three questions that I wanted to address through my presentation here. And as I said, only images. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Dhanda. So we had that. In fact, this was quite fascinating, especially the space of the Sundarbans and the Bay is something that has been quite intriguing to many. And the way, in fact, the drivers are unfolding in this part of the world, need further attention, and quite different from the ways, in fact, the blue governance, blue economy is being conceived of globally. Now, so we had three very different perspectives, but converging on some of the common goals, especially in relation to theme 1. So that's all from theme 1 right now. But as we go towards theme 2, one needs to take note of the fact that there are, underlying forces which affect both the themes. Theme 2 is all about the SDGs and SDG 14 and its interlinkages with other SDGs. So from that perspective, let me move to the first speaker, the Consul General of Portugal in Manchester, who also happens to be the external advisor to the UN Secretary General Special Envoy to the Ocean, Mr. Alves. Mr. Alves, the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon to you in India. Thank you so much for the invitation. I really wanted to thank the Portuguese and Indian embassies and Kenyan embassies in India for your kind invitation, as well as to the United Nations and all the other organizings for this opportunity to share a couple of ideas with you. I'm based in Manchester now in the UK and the Portuguese Consul General here, but I've been working in maritime affairs for the last decade or so. So I've been involved in these matters and working with colleagues in Lisbon and abroad on these issues. Unfortunately, I have to start with bad news, and these bad news are not something that comes as a surprise to you. I mean, previous speakers have spoken about it, and we all know that the ocean is facing very serious threats. Ocean warming and sea level rising is one of them. It's been mentioned already by one of the previous speakers as a result of the warming seas and melting of ice sheets. And let me give you an example, a concrete example about this particular threat. Portugal has lost 13 square kilometers because of sea level rising. It's a part of my country that simply disappeared. 13 square kilometers that disappeared because of sea level rising and coastal erosion. A second threat I would like to mention, I necessarily have to be very concise. Each of these topics would deserve a webinar itself. But the second threat I'd like to mention is pollution, marine pollution, particularly plastic. And if sea level rising is not so visible, plastic is very visible. When we go to the seaside, when we go to the coast, plastic is indeed very visible and represents 84% of all plastic, of all pollution in coastal areas. Third and final threat that I would like briefly to mention is the fact that the third of fish stocks are overexploited. Our friends and colleagues in FAO in Rome have estimated that 1/3 of all fish stocks are caught illegally or unreported or are unregulated, as one of the previous speakers has also mentioned. And I could speak about other problems: acidification, deoxygenation, shifts in the distribution of marine species. Marine species tend to go north in search of cooler areas. Our fishermen, our fishing community in Portugal is observing that in a very evident way. But okay, if we have bad news, let's try to be optimistic, because we also have good news. So I started with the bad news. Let me now try to be optimistic and move to the good news. And the good news is that we have instruments to tackle these problems. These problems exist, they are identified, but we have tools. We know what the tools are to tackle these problems. One of them, for example, is the Paris Agreement of 2015, although the word ocean is mentioned only once and only in the preamble of the text, but as it has been mentioned by a previous speaker, for example, in COP26 in Glasgow, here in the UK, very recently, the oceans have much more visibility than they used to have in the past. And of course we have, and that's the main point here today, we have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the 17 goals, Sustainable Development Goals. As a country that is co-hosting the United Nations Ocean Conference together with Kenya, Portugal is really concerned, also as a maritime country, obviously, is particularly concerned about the fact that the ocean is becoming less healthy, more polluted, more acidic, with less oxygen, with more dead zones, warmer and less resilient. And so that's why we have to act. And that's the importance of the United Nations Ocean Conference that will take place in Lisbon in the last week of June. Our point of departure for the international community and civil society is SDG 14, the SDG that is particularly focused in ocean affairs. But the question for today is, how can SDG 14 help or contribute to the full implementation of Agenda 2030, and to what extent all the remaining 16 goals may contribute themselves also to SDG 14? Well, we could elaborate one by one on the 17. I'm not going to do that. I know we don't have the time, because we could easily find linkages between each one of them and SDG 14. We don't have the time for that, and so I'm going to just focus on 3 or 4 of these goals, and to see to what extent they relate to SDG 14. Let me start by SDG 1 and 2 together. SDG 1 about poverty, fighting poverty, ending poverty, and SDG 2 about zero hunger. Well, we know that 20% of the proteins we eat comes from the ocean. The percentage is even higher in a country like Portugal or Japan or Iceland, because these are the 3 top consumers of fish per capita in the world. But on average, 20% of the protein we eat comes from the ocean, and many coastal communities depend on ocean-based activities as their main source of income. I'm speaking not only about fisheries, of course, but also about coastal tourism, shipping industry, and those activities create millions of jobs. Maritime jobs and a decent income are a precious tool to put an end to poverty, as prescribed in SDG 1, and of course to fight hunger and to help to achieve zero hunger, as prescribed in SDG 2. And this is true not only for maritime countries, but also for landlocked countries. Maybe this comes as a surprise, but I remember a recent report of the European Union saying that Czech Republic, a landlocked country, is one of the European champions in pond aquaculture. So you don't need to be a maritime country to develop blue economy. We cannot call it ocean economy when applied to a country like Czech Republic, of course, but it's surely blue economy. Second example I'd like to give, SDG 3 about good health and well-being. Well, coming from a maritime city myself, where my family still lives, in Cascais, I can only confirm that the ocean plays a very important role in terms of an healthy life, physical and mental well-being. But it's more than that. If we want to reduce mortality, pandemics, diseases, as the targets, the different targets of SDG 3 invite us to do, then we must develop marine biotechnology, where pharmaceutical industry, for example, has an important role based on maritime elements like seaweed, kelp, and enzymes. Bioindustry is a top priority for Portugal, and we have been investing significantly in this industry. SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. A major challenge we are all facing, as our societies are now committed to decarbonize, and they are engaged in an energy transition to clean and affordable energies, as SDG 7.
Mr. Alves, you have 2 more minutes.
Okay, the ocean has an immense potential, both in terms of offshore and tide energy. Another example, climate action, SDG 13. Only a safe, healthy, and resilient ocean can guarantee that. We know that, it has been mentioned, the ocean absorbs CO2, but the ocean also provides oxygen. Half of the oxygen we breathe, 50% of the oxygen we breathe comes from the ocean in its role as a climate regulator. And my final point, and I will end here, the connection between SDG 14 and SDG 6 on clean water and sanitation. The ocean is the biggest reservoir of water in the world, and the division between fresh water and salt water has to be avoided, as the connections between SDG 6 about water and SDG 14 about the ocean are very, very interconnected. And that's why in Lisbon we will organize a special event, one of the several special events that we will organize together with the conference itself, the main conference. We will organize a high-level symposium on water, bridging and studying and interpreting and developing these connections between SDG 6 and the SDG 14. So before coming to the UK, I was posted in Paris to the Portuguese mission to the OECD, and there was this sentence that was repeated all the times, and governments and everybody, all of us, repeated all the times, that we have to build back better. But at the OECD, the then Secretary General used to say that it's not only about building back better, it's building forward better. Look at the future and to see to what extent we can use green growth and blue growth as a means to overcome the crisis we have faced in the last 2 years. A step forward that must be based with nature-based solutions for a sustainable development and blue economy approach. That's what we will try to do in the United Nations Ocean Conference in Lisbon. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so very much, Mr. Alves. In fact, the message is absolutely clear. While talking about the interlinkages, you clearly stressed upon how we can leverage on green growth and blue growth, essentially to combat the brown growth model that we are following. Of course, now we have this very Occidental framework. We also want the Global South to speak, and that is precisely why, in fact, Malshini has been invited. She works on the seeds and has been working for quite some time on the blue economy. So Malshini Senaratne, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much for having me. Hi, everyone. I come to you from the beautiful islands of Seychelles, and I will share with you the perspective of SIDS, and in particular, my country's experience with respect to the blue economy model. So we launched a blue economy framework in 2018, and this was in very clear recognition that for us, sustainable ocean-based development was going to be our future. Now, the Seychelles is 90% water. We have land of approximately 450 square kilometers, but our territorial waters, our exclusive economic zone, is about 1.3 million square kilometers. So it goes without saying that for us, SDG 14 is of utmost importance. But it is a fact that marine conservation has almost universally been considered to be one of the least important of all of the 17 SDGs. And SDG 14 in particular receives the lowest impact investment as a result. However, a lot of research will show us the indivisibility of the SDGs, and in particular for SDG 14, there's about 97 target level interactions between this goal and all of the rest of the 16. So for Seychelles, we have stressed SDG 14 to a large extent. In 2020, we designated 30% of our territorial waters a marine protected area. So we have covered about 26.4% of our EEZ under an MPA, which means that the Seychelles has surpassed its SDG 14.5 commitment. In our view, the MPAs will increase not just the resilience of our fisheries and tourism bases, but will also provide safe havens for biodiversity. So looking at the Seychelles example, it becomes very clear to us that an adverse impact on our oceans will cumulatively impair their ability to provide ecosystem services. And this will contribute to a great number of other SDGs that we hope, obviously, to achieve, such as poverty eradication, food security, being a climate regulator, and also, of course, economic development. Now, I want to share with you some special characteristics of SIDS that the Seychelles reflects greatly on. For one thing, we have a very small population. We are 98,000 people in total. That's it. However, we have the highest GDP per capita in Africa, about $12.3 billion. Nonetheless, Poverty is very prevalent. 25% of the Seychelles population is living below the poverty line. Socioeconomic inequality is also very, very stark. We are part of the 40% of the world's coastal communities that currently live within 100 kilometers of the coast. Our reliance on imports is very high. We import about 90% of our food and other related commodities, which makes food security a huge concern. And tourism and fisheries to date remain two of our most developed economic bases. And of course, in the age of the pandemic, we have realized that reliance on these two very narrow bases compound problems for us greatly. Underlying all of this, of course, is climate change. With the rising sea levels, the changing weather patterns, Seychelles has lost about 90% of its coral reefs due to bleaching events. And we also have flooding events that have created significant losses within agriculture as well as tourism. So for us, an attainment of SDG 14 means that we can increase the return of investment when we come to reaching our other goals. We have attempted very innovative funding in an attempt to finance our blue economy model. So the first thing we did was we launched the first blue bond in 2015, I believe. This mobilized about $15 million worth of private sector investment that served to support marine projects in the Seychelles. And we were also very successful in undertaking a debt for nature swap. So what happened here was funds were freed up and they were earmarked for specifically the environment, marine conservation projects, fisheries projects. And I myself have been very, very humbled to have received grant funding dedicated to marine projects or conservation projects in the Seychelles. So it's a very good example of how a country can leverage its marine assets as part of the blue economy sector. And it's a very good advantage for large ocean states as well. However, we are an island and we cannot make these initiatives happen unless we work in tandem with our regional and our global partners. So for us especially, we have worked with countries like India. Case in point, numerous blue economy initiatives have been undertaken with India over the years, notably in the spheres of maritime security, naval support, research, and Portugal as well have deepened diplomatic relations with the Seychelles, and they intend to exchange experiences in the fields of the blue economy, specifically renewable energy, as well as maritime security. And with the EU as well, we have signed fisheries agreements and renewed fisheries agreements for the coming 6 years. And what is notably unique about the recent agreement is that there is an environmental fund of about euro 200,000 in there to cater for environmental concerns that would arise with this sector. And I suppose in a post-COVID world, such corporations will take on added significance. The pandemic has not been very kind to us, and I'm sure it has not been very kind to any country around the world as well, but it has greatly thrown us off our blue economy agenda. There are opportunities still present to move us away from what is very much, to move us towards, my apologies, a very circular economy, one that is based on sustainable growth. However, we are seeing here, as well as in other countries around the world, this urgent need for a quick economic recovery seems to be perhaps sidelining environmental concerns once again. However, divergences will always exist if partners put their own interests beforehand. So for Seychelles, we have always tried to emphasize in our partnerships the need to cater for perhaps what is viewed as non-traditional issues, piracy, transactional crime, overfishing, climate change. And to that end, because we've been talking about the ocean for so long, but no one has seen a live shot.
Malshini, 2 minutes to sum up.
Of course. I hope you all can see that this is what I see every day. This is my country, and there is a need to recommit towards SDG 14. There is a need to perhaps have more policy relevant analysis. There is a need to have a more holistic and integrated manner when it comes to talking about the ocean and managing policies around the ocean, because at the end of the day, we have these issues that will become your issues down the line unless we take the time now to really put SDG 14 at the heart of the narrative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malshini. Pretty well on time, and thank you for a lovely exposition on the concerns of Seychelles. Now we heard from Portugal, from Seychelles, and now it's the UN perspective from Mr. Ashish Chaturvedi, who happens to be the head of the Environment Unit at the UNDP. Ashish, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nilanjan, for this opportunity. And my sort of regards to all the dignitaries and also Mr. Sharp and my colleague Divya. I think a lot has been said already, and the interlinkages, Malshini just mentioned about the 97 linkages, and Mr. Alves also mentioned the linkages to other SDGs. I would like to start off by talking a little bit about the targets which are already embedded in Goal 14, and maybe start from there to talk about what potential interlinkages could exist with other SDGs. So the 10 targets which are covered under the SDG 14 basically talk about conserving and sustainably using the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. If you look at target 14.1 on pollution and 14.3 on ocean acidification, it basically covers the important threats to oceans. Target 14.2 on management and protection of marine and coastal ecosystems, 14.4 on managing fishing activities, and 14.5 on coastal and marine areas essentially refer to oceans as ecosystems. And the target 14.6 on fishery subsidies, 14.7 on benefits for small island developing states, as well as the LDCs, and relate to the economy surrounding the oceans. Similarly, the target on 14.8, which refers to scientific knowledge and transfer of technology, and 14.C refers to the implementation of international law in the UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas. Now, each of these, when you look at the sort of essential elements of these targets, there are significant interlinkages with the other SDGs. And some examples have already been given, and I can actually point a couple more. So for instance, on good health and well-being, the goal 3, when oceans not only provide recreational prospects for mental well-being, they also present countless and diverse resources for new drugs to combat major diseases such as cancer and malaria. On the sort of linkages with clean water and sanitation, some of my other panelists have already mentioned. Well, even in the case of India, erosion has been experienced in 15 to 16% of the Indian coast that has direct runoff into the coastal waters. Land-based activities and direct discharge into the oceans has to be curtailed so that the polluter pays principle can actually be put into practice. And of course, marine plastic pollution has already been identified by my fellow panelists. In terms of the goal linkages with goal 7, Mr. Alves already talked about it, but in India, we've already identified potential for tidal energy of more than 17,000 megawatts, and that of wave energy of around 40,000 megawatts. So we're really talking about oceans, of course, they're suffering due to the sort of excesses and pushing of planetary boundaries, but also as part of the solution to the crisis that we are all in right now. The goal, sort of linkages with goal 12 on responsible consumption and production are also fairly obvious, but for instance, the changes in consumption behavior would impact the demand for food and also may increase or decrease the pressure on fish stocks. We have to start thinking about efficient fishing methods, but at the global level, sustainability standards and certification of fisheries can contribute to a more sustainable management of fisheries, which is aligned with goal 12 on responsible consumption and production. I won't really want, well, I would have loved to talk about climate action, but a lot of my fellow panelists have already spoken about them. But the two things that I would also like to mention around, which haven't been mentioned thus far, is the link with goal 16 on peace and justice, as well as strong institutions. So effective institutions in general help achieve effective control of and reduction in pollution and are important for achieving conservation and management of marine areas, including the marine protected areas. So this also applies to local and national level institutions, as well as global and regional institutions relating to implementation of international law as reflected in the UNCLOS. And finally, the linkages to goal 17, which is about partnerships to achieve the global goals. The dimensions of finance, capacity building, trade, information and communication, technology and data, monitoring and accountability are all relevant for the achievement of goal 14. And this would essentially mean that we have to curate all kinds of very creative alliances, which bring these different kinds of communities, the communities behind finance, on technical assistance, on trade, to set up these. So if we really want to achieve the targets that we have set for ourselves to for goal 14. And in particular, financing and capacity building have already been identified as important, very important across the set of SDG 14 targets. So in terms of sort of my concluding remarks, I think the SDGs, of course, are not only interlinked to each other, but the targets of SDG 14 are also interlinked amongst themselves. And I think it's very important to sort of really realize that with climate change showing a visible impact on marine ecosystems, and which is also connected deeply with livelihoods and economy of not only coastal communities, it's sort of, we have to start thinking about not only local action, but also substantive global action. And I think there is some movement, as we've already heard from the fellow panelists. SDG 14 happens to be the least financed of all the SDGs. And we have to start thinking about all the creative solutions, some of the examples which already been given by the sort of previous speakers. And we'll do well to ensure that funding is channelized towards supporting transitions to a blue economy by investing in sustainable fishing practices, including sort of climate change mitigation and adaptation practices, promoting clean energy systems in shipping, and facilitating technology transfer, digitization, and innovations, all kinds of innovations cutting across the different SDGs and the interlinkages between and within SDG 14. Finally, sort of, it is imperative that we not only recognize and act towards building a healthy ocean, but also ensure that a reduction in human-induced stresses through shared responsibility and collaborative action is driving the agenda forward as far as sort of the achievement of the goals that we have set for ourselves. So that's it from my side. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. You have absolutely kept on time. And thanks for putting across a very succinct statement on the intersections. Rather, as we all know, in fact, the various SDGs often turn out to be, at times they're cross-cutting in nature. They take care of the processes, outcomes. There are intersectors, verticals, enablers, all across. At times they're in conflict with each other. So with that, in fact, we are through with the very first round, and there are already questions, but we have 18 minutes time. Now, there is a question for Dr. Anurag Danda, and this is from my colleague, Dr. Malanja Chakraborty from the CNED. The question is, you mentioned expansion of MPAs, not one of the best ways to curb the rate of global extinction. Could you elaborate on some of your own recommendations? Also, what exactly do you mean by cause and effect relationship should be localized?
Yeah.
Dr. Danda.
Thank you. I did not say that we don't need MPAs or we don't need to expand MPAs. The idea essentially is because of the interconnectedness. For example, ocean acidification. There is very little that can be done in a very localized manner within the MPA boundaries. Temperature rise leading to leaching of corals. We heard that in Seychelles, 90% of the corals have bleached. Not because what Seychelles did to their corals, because of the global nature of the problem, right? So when I say localized, say, for example, MPAs are effective in addressing overfishing. Despite the fact that the resource is mobile, but the activity is within a space that can be designated, that can be regulated, and therefore the cause and effect relationship, if it is localized, can be managed within the MPA. And in my own address, I had mentioned that conceptually it's very similar to the terrestrial protected area system, but when it comes to managing and governing a marine protected area, it's actually quite a different ballgame altogether. I hope that clarifies. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you, Malaj.
Thank you. I presume there's another question from Abhishek Chakraborty, which essentially can be addressed by any of the 6 speakers. Rather, I would request all the 6 speakers to have their bits on this particular question. This is a very, very vital question, cross-cutting across both the themes, and extremely important in the present context. How can the transition to a sustainable blue economy or a blue economy, or suppose say a blue economy, how does it contribute to the green recovery? How does it contribute to build back better? So can we start with Dr. Anna Kulako, and then Divya, then Anurag, Mr. Alves. Dr. Anna, would you like to go ahead with this?
Well, this is a very interesting question, and I think it's difficult to answer. I'm more commenting than answering. The sustainable blue economy depends on what we call sustainable. Okay, so sustainable, the definition is something that it can be renewed, that it can be maintained. So I will see, in my opinion, if we go for a green recovery, it means, for instance, when we are talking about MPAs, the MPAs will restore the populations of fishes. So if you restore, there will be this effect of MPA, that will be the spillover, and then these the fishes can be maintained, the populations, and it's the overall of that area that can be fished. Also, there is this idea of adaptive management, adaptive MPAs that can move on time and on space in order to protect areas that need to recover, that were damaged by the human hand. And this goes towards the nature-based solutions. And the nature-based solutions is also a very important step for the green recovery. But this is all interlinked. So we really need to think about what is the sustainability, towards what action, and towards what we want to do. I will keep here. Thank you.
Divya, this falls in your domain exactly. So go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think I sort of mentioned when I spoke that 60% of the global GDP is already coming from the oceans and coastal ecosystems in around 100 kilometers off our coastlines. So that sort of in itself, this number highlights the role of oceans in reviving economic growth. I'd say sort of two issues stand out for me. And, while we are talking about policy, governance, global international cooperation, etc., on blue economy, I think two aspects are going to be critical. First, how can the medium, small, and micro enterprises that I think are really on the front line of addressing ocean health, community needs, and climate risk be empowered to become an active stakeholder in the blue economy and through the blue economy in the whole building back better discourse. And secondly, I think, we really need to think about the role of the financial sector and financial institutions. We've heard some very good examples of green, blue bonds, etc. But how can the financial sector play a more catalytic role in sustainable blue economy and economic revival? UNEP in 2018 launched the Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Principles, which is the world's first global guiding framework for banks, insurers, investors to finance a sustainable blue economy. I think we will need such principles and other such initiatives to be institutionalized more widely for us to see the change that we want to. So I would sort of emphasize on MSMEs and the financial sector for us to move ahead on blue economy and through the blue economy on building back better. Thank you.
Thank you, Divya. Anurag?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. When it comes to building back better, my experience of working in this very rich natural area and a coastal ecosystem has been quite different. I mean, when we were all taking a beating globally, the people of this region were actually being eaten up by tides. So this dependence on the ecosystem, despite the fact that it is majorly a coastal ecosystem, but the only coastal ecosystem with tigers, people who were falling back on the ecosystem, which is often referred to as the GDP of the poor, is not something that we would like people to fall back upon in times of distress. People need to move away and move up the system. So when we are saying we want to build back better, we want to make it safer for the people, benign for the ecosystem, because as I said, when a lot of people came back to the Sundarbans because their jobs had taken a hit because of the lockdown and so on and so forth, the intensity of resource exploitation was very high, so which had its own bearing on the natural ecosystem. Plus, it had consequences for people who were trying to extract these resources. So when we want to build back, obviously, this is not a model that we would like to see as a fallback option. Right? And it would be, what is required is, as I was showing in my last slide, that we have production systems that take advantage of the natural processes. Nature-based solutions is the way forward in terms of building back better, building back greener. Thank you.
Mr. Alves?
Well, thank you again. One of the reasons why I prefer to use the expression blue economy instead of ocean economy or maritime economy is not only because of the reason I said before, that blue economy also applies to landlocked countries, but is also because of these interconnection between the idea of blue economy and green economy. And I think they go well together. They go hand in hand. And one of the elements that bridges between blue economy and green economy is precisely sustainability. If it is not sustainable, then it's not green. If it is not sustainable, then it's not blue. Some authors prefer to say sustainable blue economy, but in my opinion, I think we should stick just to the two words, blue economy, emphasizing that the idea of sustainability has to be inside. And if it is not sustainable, then it's not blue. And before I finish, I know time is very short now. If we go to the example that I gave in my previous intervention about offshore wind farms, we know that from information from the International Energy Agency, we know that in the last 20 years, offshore energy has grown 30% every year. And the offshore wind energy around the globe may prevent the emission of 5,000 to 7,000 million tons of CO2 in the next decade, 2 decades. So the potential in terms of decarbonization, for example, of blue economy when used in a sustainable manner, promoting circular economy, promoting inclusion is enormous, and that's surely one of the main topics of the Lisbon Conference.
Malshini?
Thank you. So Seychelles has protected about 50% of its land. There is very little avenue for development per se. And what we realized was even agriculture would require significant trade-off. We are considered to be one of the biodiversity hotspots in the Indian Ocean. So what have we done? One, we've committed to boosting renewable energies. And to that end, we are home to the largest floating solar power plant that is to be installed on saltwater in the world. And it's a first for the African continent as well. And with regard to public-private partnerships, it's the first project that is going to be led by an independent power producer in our country. Second, we have already started aquaculture pilot projects with the collaboration and the support and the financing of the EU as a way to add to our food security. And last but not least, blue carbon has become, well, it was always part of our blue economy model, but recently we have started talking about blue carbon and started to analyze the stock that we've got in our waters. So we are apparently home to one of the largest seagrass meadows in the Western Indian Ocean, but we still do not have an understanding of what we have, what we own. And to that end, I guess my concluding thoughts are, it remains for us very much part and parcel of our country's development. The blue economy is not going to go away anytime soon for the Seychelles. We have stake in it. There's skin in the game for us. And to a large extent, we will continue to push for this particular model down the line. simply because it is our largest asset that we've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Ashish, your intervention.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think the transition to a green, well, sort of to a blue economy, and then which might potentially lead to a green recovery as well, would of course include contributions to the energy potential in our oceans, and which Mr. Alves has mentioned already. The other point is about the sort of the threats that the coastal areas are facing, and how does one sort of the investments in adaptation that can happen, for instance, by sort of improving the protection of coastal areas, and whatever investments that we are making in order to make the coastal areas much more inhabitable, can potentially lead to sort of all kinds of creative solutions in terms of land value capture. So there are solutions around how to create, we require more finance and investments for greener recovery. And if you can start thinking about how you're making those investments in coastal areas, including sort of broader investments in the sustainable blue economy, some of those financing can actually be raised through the adaptation efforts. So the idea that, well, globally we are told that sort of for every $1 investment in adaptation, you get a return of $4. So the return on investment is almost sort of, 4 times. So if you can start thinking about skimming some of that to finance future investments in sustaining the green recovery, I think that can be one of the creative ways for even sort of thinking about blue bonds, but all the other kinds of investments as well. So I think that's where I see a big potential, in addition to, of course, the raw material sources, the low sort of low carbon footprint lifestyles, sort of food choices, energy. I think this entire bit of financing could also be a very important sort of pathway to a greener recovery.
Thank you. There is a question from Shainangshu, but I don't think that we will be in a position to take this at this point in time. So probably, Shainangshu, you can write to the speakers over email. The question is, of course, very significant, that there is so little that we know about the oceans, its species, and much of its processes, that our actions are perhaps leading to a mass extinction in the oceans without us even realizing what we are losing. Despite all the scientific unknowns, which would require more funding for research, as well as considering the natural assets that ocean ecosystems are, why is SDG 14 the most neglected as compared to other SDGs, both in terms of funding and concerted action? Well, I think this is a very, very vital question, undoubtedly, Shainangshu, but since we don't have time, maybe in fact, you can connect with the speakers at in some other forum, in some other way. But it is time to conclude, because every good thing has to come to an end. And yes, we intended to bring about a varied numbers of diverse voices in this particular platform, from the global north, from the global south, from the UN. And eventually, what we find is that yes, there are synergies, but there are also differentials in terms of the ways things are being perceived, and also in terms of the impacts. As far as the global south is concerned, the impacts are problematic at times, which was mentioned by Dr. Danda, in fact, during his second intervention, where the dependence of the vulnerable sections of the population living along the coast is disproportionately high on the various, especially the provisioning services. And there is less recognition about the various regulating services, especially blue carbon. And we know that there is a huge pocket of marine plastics on the bay itself, that is near the Myanmar-Bangladesh coast. So now, in fact, the TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystem and Biodiversity Assessments, they identified some of these ecosystem services, especially for the global south, as GDP of the poor, since a large component of the formal incomes emerge from these. And if one actually looks at the values of the ecosystem services, not merely the incomes that is emerging from the ecosystem services, but the total value of the ecosystem services, it is found that the values of the ecosystem services often exceed the incomes of the poor. That means if we devise this ratio called the ecosystem dependency index, which is actually the ratio of the values of the ecosystem services and income of the community in and around some of these coastal areas. And we found that in certain cases, this ratio is exceeding 1. That means they're getting more from the ecosystems in terms of some of the provisioning services than what they're earning from the formal economic sources. Now, in the context of, suppose, climate change and global warming, which is creating a reprehensible impact, negative impact on these ecosystem services, naturally, there is a shrinkage of opportunities, a shrinkage of what the goods and services that you are extracting from them. And so this needs a different statement. So managing, protecting, and restoring the marine and coastal ecosystems based on science and innovation is not just essential for the sustenance of the ocean-based economies, but this is a very, very critical equity concern. It's a concern of distributive justice. And that is why, in fact, the interlinkages of these various SDGs emerge when we are talking about SDG 1, SDG 2, even SDG 3, which Ashish has been mentioning, Mr. Alves has also been mentioning. So these are some of the critical issues that possibly we need to do together. There needs to be a concerted effort to achieve these. And I'm extremely elated and happy that some of these issues got flagged off today. And more importantly, I really thank the Portugal Embassy and the UN office in India for having supported this particular forum so that we could come up with some very, very interesting insights from all this. Thanks to all the speakers, thanks to both the ambassadors and Mr. Sharp, and of course to Claudia, and for setting the tone in the inaugural session so that we could have this kind of an interesting deliberation during the panel. Thank you, speakers. It's been absolutely fascinating interacting with you over the last 80 minutes. Thanks.